how how to apply the Dhamma to what's been happening lately in our world or in our life. And I've been thinking a bit about what I've been hearing on the news, as I'm sure, as I know many people are. And there's a couple levels to it. Obviously, the mundane. Um, how do you navigate this situation or the situations that arise on a practical, conventional level? And then how do you witness it, observe it, work with it in the practice for greater depth and clarity around the true nature of reality? So on a more practical, mundane level, and the Buddha taught on both these levels. He taught us how to be skillful in the interactions we have, the relationships we have, and the situations we find ourselves in the world. And he always had the grounding or the container around that advice and those teachings to help us be on the right track for complete realization of nibbana and the end of suffering. So I was thinking about a couple of suttas that talk about praise and criticism, because it's the Buddha talks about that as, handling that correctly is a skillful means and important to our happiness and our development. And I thought I would share those with you just in brief, not as a detailed study. They're pretty short, but you kind of get the idea. The first one I want to talk about is, both of them are in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, and the first one is number 100, and it's called With Patalia the Wanderer. And basically, this wanderer of another sect. So, in India, people would live that ascetic life, maybe under a teacher, maybe not. And they walk for alms, and that's how they live, in the spiritual quest. And so a wanderer from another sect obviously is not a disciple of the Buddha, but often they would come to see different ones would come to see the Buddha, or sometimes the Buddha would go to visit them. There are instances like that in the suttas too. So Patalia goes to see the Buddha, and the Buddha says to him, there are 4 kinds of people found in the world. And this is kind of a common way that the Buddha would frame some concept, some idea about human beings. There's 4 kinds or 2 kinds or whatever the number. And in this case, what he is going to talk about is criticism and praise. And so these 4 kinds of people that he's talking about here, he starts with saying one person criticizes those deserving of criticism at the right time, truthfully and correctly. But they don't praise those deserving of praise at the right time, truthfully and correctly. So in each case, there's the right time, truthfully and correctly. So this is actually praising or criticizing someone legitimately. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But this person that he's describing, or this approach, is, delivering the criticism, but not praising. And I don't know if you know or can think of any examples in your own life. I have a relative who one time, many years ago, when my kids were growing up, and so were theirs, said to me, don't praise your children. And I know they were willing to criticize their children. I mean, parents should try to impart to their children what they think is right and wrong, and appropriate or inappropriate. But this idea, they said, don't praise them. You know, they'll get conceited. And I didn't agree with that position. It didn't seem to me like that was going to be a helpful approach. And of course, that part of what the Buddha includes here of the right time, truthfully and correctly, you can see how important that is. Like, you really praise someone because they are doing something praiseworthy, behaving in a way that's praiseworthy, and it's not over the top, and it's at the right time. And the criticism also to try to help them see what they can do to be more skillful. And I don't know, when I think about this, I do think that, you know, this is a way that a person can kind of relate to the world. Like, they don't give out praise, they only give out criticism. And or that's their general approach. And that seems pretty grumpy, really. So this is person number one. And then he says there's another person praises those deserving of praise, but they don't criticize those deserving criticism. And I've also seen that. And I had some thought about that early on when I came in contact with Buddhism. It felt like it's okay to give praise, but maybe it's not okay to be critical. Or I don't know, maybe I got that from Thumper. Do you know the line? If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. That's what his mama told him, something like that. And so, you know, this idea that you know, and it's a lot easier to give praise than it is to give constructive criticism and feel the discomfort of you know, confronting someone maybe with something. Again, it's so important that it's at the right time and truthful and correct. So that's person number two. And another person doesn't praise those deserving of praise, nor do they criticize those deserving of criticism. And you might have experienced that too, where people don't say anything either way. And then finally, the fourth one, which I'm sure you can guess by now, it's someone who praises when someone is deserving of praise, and they criticize when someone's deserving of criticism. And then the Buddha asks Potalya which one he thinks is the best. Okay, so which one do you think is the best? Oh, clever. You're a good test taker, I bet. Well, Potalya says he thinks it's the person who neither praises those deserving of praise nor criticizes those deserving of criticism. And he says that because he says that would be equanimity. You'd be equanimous. You just, whatever, you know, you're going to be even-minded and just, and the Buddha says, no, that's not the one that's the best. Shruti had it right. This is the last one. Praising those who are deserving of praise and criticizing those deserving of criticism. And I always found that to be helpful, practical, honest, and skillful, because, you know, the Buddha does always talk about, you know, speech having 5 qualities, actually: to be truthful, to be coming from a place of loving kindness in the heart, to be timely, to be having a good purpose. There's another quality. You probably know what it is. I can't remember.
Coming from a heart of loving kindness, truthful, not harsh.
Not harsh. Gentle, not harsh.
Gentle,
that's
not
the other
harsh.
one.
That's the one.
And, so, to really recognize that when we think about the times we're living in, and we can probably pick almost any time in human history, but these days we're hearing a lot of criticism and a lot of praise. And how do we know if it's deserving? How do we tell what's praiseworthy, what's blameworthy? And of course, we can look at basic moral precepts and principles. How is it that people are treating each other? Are they really being truthful or not? Are we living, or what we're evaluating, is that coming from a place of service and giving, or is it coming from selfishness and greed and anger, hatred, delusion? So those are some of our obvious criteria. And there's the other short sutta I was thinking of puts an emphasis on that part. Like really, really being discerning. And this one's called Broken. And it's also in the Book of Fours of the Anguttara Nikaya. It's number 3. And he talks about two kinds of people here, really, even though they have 4 qualities, which is what got this into the Book of Four. And the first person he talks about is the foolish, incompetent, untrue person. So someone who's not being very discerning. And he says they have 4 qualities that keep themselves broken and damaged. And it says these 4 qualities are: without examining or scrutinizing, they praise those deserving of criticism, and they criticize those deserving of praise. So we can probably see examples of those 2 things. They arouse faith in things that are dubious, and they don't arouse faith in things that are inspiring. So there's a lot of emphasis from the Buddha on how we influence other people. If we keep precepts and we encourage others to keep precepts, this is obviously a very good thing. If we encourage others to break precepts, this is obviously a very detrimental thing. If we encourage people to follow a good path, this is a very good thing. If we encourage people to follow a wrong path, this is very detrimental. And it gets heavier the more responsibility you have as a parent, as a teacher, especially a spiritual teacher. If we're leading people the wrong way, the karma gets heavier the more influence you have, the more authority you have. And we can look at social media and we can really, give us pause to how people can become quite well known and taken as authorities, and yet might be influencing people the wrong way, encouraging the increase of greed, hatred, and delusion. But then, of course, we have the other side, the encouraging brighter side, the astute, competent, true person that keeps themselves intact and unscathed. And they do the opposite, of course. After examining and scrutinizing, they criticize those deserving of criticism and they praise those deserving of praise. They don't arouse faith in things that are dubious, and they do arouse faith in things that are inspiring. So just reflecting, because sometimes we can get so caught up in the world and the trends of the world and the circumstances that we witness, that we hear about, and we can really put a lot of attention on the negative, and it can even really obsess the mind. And if we take a step back and observe and look at, okay, what do I really know about this situation, and based on what I'm seeing, so not to get too definite and self-righteous about it, because there's an awful lot of we don't know in any of these cases, but based on what we are able to observe and how that relates to the Dhamma, then we can, with care, see what's really wholesome and unwholesome based on the conditions and the really just based on the conditions in our culture, in our society, and what is acceptable and unacceptable in our environment, those kinds of things. And so one of the things I've been doing is to put some extra attention on those things that are praiseworthy. And this last week, there were a couple of really bright spots, especially Thursday. It was kind of a magical day. There were two things in the news that I really found encouraging and inspiring. And one of them was that it was the 25th anniversary of the Gates Foundation. And I mentioned this last night at Sutta Study too, but I thought I would just share a paragraph from the New York Times about this. So that was Thursday, and they said the Gates Foundation was established in 2000 when Melinda French Gates was just 35 and Bill Gates was 44 and the richest man in the world. The foundation quickly became one of the most consequential philanthropies the world has ever seen, utterly reshaping the landscape of global public health, pouring more than $100 billion into causes starved for resources and helping save tens of millions of lives. And their focus has been on lowering the death rate of children around the world during their first 5 years. And I saw a short interview with Bill Gates, and he said that in the last 25 years, they've reduced the kind of mind-boggling death rate of children under 5 around the world, which is 10 million a year dying before the age of 5. And they've cut that in half to 5 million. And he said, of course, it's 5 million too many, but to have been able to cut that in half and have 5 million more children a year be able to survive till the age of 5. And that's a particularly challenging period of life to kind of get some real stability and to have enough nutrition. So the Gates Foundation focuses on vaccines that help the children be able to survive various problems that are common in particularly poor societies. And then also nutrition and medical care and things that are really essential for a child to survive and thrive. And, to see that kind of use of wealth is so inspiring. You really can get a sense of how beautiful it is when we turn our attention to being kind, supportive, generous, noble, at whatever level that happens in our life. And then the second thing that happened that day is the electing of a new pope. And when Pope Francis passed away, it did kind of feel like a particularly bright light left the world, I think. And the new pope seems to be following in similar beautiful humanitarian focus on the poor of our world, the disadvantaged, the disenfranchised, prisoners, immigrants, people who are really struggling. And this has been the history with this particular person. The fact that he was born in the same part of the world as I was is also kind of fun. He's from Chicago, and he sounds like my family members, right in that same part of the country south of Chicago. But, to really get a sense of his ministry and mission over the decades as a priest, and, to more recently a cardinal, and now the Pope, brings a lot of hope, particularly in a time when across the world there's a leaning more towards authoritarian governments and war and harshness, and to celebrate every leaning towards tolerance, acceptance, love, and to really think about how this relates to ultimate reality. And, as we open ourselves to that which doesn't change, pure consciousness, and the qualities of that do not change, that it's loving, that it's blissful, that it's, of course, completely stable, the changeless, the deathless. And to listen to these master teachers who are talking about it from their direct experience, to recognize that it's right here for us to experience, to explore, to understand, to open to, by letting go of everything else. And to see that the Buddha taught all of these things about how to think about things, how to speak about things, how to act in the world, that all carries us to freedom, freedom from suffering, freedom from attachment. And that there is this important relationship between conventional reality and ultimate reality. And it's the path that we walk, that we cultivate. And everything we do really does matter. And to be sensitive to and cautious of holding ourselves fixed in an identity Like even when I say everything matters, then the mind could be conditioned to go to, oh yeah, I did this or that wasn't good, and kind of beat ourselves up and think that that's going to hold us back. But that's not what we're told by people who are at that point of having let go of everything on the conventional plane. They say none of that is a barrier to awakening. That there's always a path of spiritual recovery, or a way of seeing the truth, and all of that, whatever happened before, is left behind. And I thought it was interesting. I don't know, I heard this quote, and I don't know if it was Pope Francis or now Pope is Leo the 14th. But this idea that they imagine hell to be empty, and that there is, I don't know what to say, that's universal salvation for everyone in the world, regardless of religion, regardless of any other conditions.
Yeah, I think it was Pope Francis.
Pope
I
Francis.
think it might have been redemption.
Redemption. Yeah,
redemption is possible for us.
We could use that word. But then you come back to Ajahn Ganha and Ajahn Sumedho, and they say all religions are pointing at the same thing. They're all pointing at the ultimate reality, and there's no way to explain it in perfect terms because we've only got words, and it's experience. And to really recognize that, and to let go more and more of this self and other kind of way of seeing things, and recognize that each of us also experience greed, hatred, and delusion, and that we can recognize that in ourselves, and we can recognize that in our world, and take the other path away from it, through it, letting go. And we get opportunities every day to make that choice. So I'd like to invite any comments or questions.
I like the part about it really is so important to check things out before you praise or blame. You want to be praising in the right direction, really understand what's happening, and when there's blame, the same thing, maybe even more so. Like we study the Vinaya a lot, especially lately. We've been doing a bunch, and whenever something happens, like rules usually get made because someone was doing something that didn't look good. So the Buddha's always like, hey, how could they do that? What were you thinking? You know, he'll ask the monastic what they were thinking, or, you know, their reason for doing something. And sometimes it's like a perfectly good reason that had nothing to do with why people were complaining about it. and he'll be like, oh, that's a good reason, but don't do it. It looks bad, you know? So it's like, you still have to worry about why someone did something matters, whether or not it's blameworthy or praiseworthy. But then also like wanting to adjust your behavior to appear, you know, inoffensive, to not offend anybody, or to be more upright, even if you think you have even if there is a good reason for it, it still matters to people, I guess. It's part of that everything you do does matter kind of a thing. So if it appears blameworthy, it's still good to avoid it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think it's important, like you're saying, to recognize what the person's intention is. That's often a big part of the Vinaya rule. And it's not about looking good. That's not your point. It's like if people see something and they get the wrong idea, or they think there's something wrong, then that's in their head. and that's bad for them.
Or even if they're hurt by it, you didn't mean anything, but it did. The impact was bad. The intention versus impact idea. It's like, it does matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're never going to perfect the personality level. So there was always problems in the Sangha, people in different situations, and there's always going to be problems in this conventional reality. So it's a constant, investigation internally, and in monastic Sangha, for example, really supporting each other to, as best we can, do what's beautiful, what's encouraging, what's leading in the right direction, both for the practitioner themselves and for the people they touch, one way or another. Yeah, Philip.
I've been thinking about like what you were saying, like, oh, there's always problems in the Sangha. And then, in groups, there's always problems. I've been thinking a lot recently about, like, maybe there's a middle way of going along versus pushing back. Like in a lot of groups, I've been trying to think more of, like, don't think so much in terms of right or wrong, or whose idea is better, or like, what should we do? A lot of times, yeah, you might get a different outcome, but it's not that huge of a thing. Like, as long as no one's being abusive, sometimes you just go along with stuff, right? Like, well, sometimes you would hope that there's a leader around who can, like, make everyone kind of like keep the peace and whatnot. Sometimes you don't, and you hope that there's enough people in the group who can let go of, well, you know what? It's not about whose idea is better or whatever. Like, you should just kind of keep the peace, even if maybe you were like a little bit bullied a little bit. Like, you should just let it go. Like, if it's not so bad that it's breaking precepts or it's something really abusive is going on, like, you should just let it go. Sometimes there's that, right? Yeah. And if you could be in a situation where there's no leader who can help you along, or like get everyone to be better to each other, sometimes that's not there, and you have to be the kind of person who can let that go, right? Sometimes there's that.
I agree.
I feel like there's kind of like a middle way, right? Like, okay, maybe if you can't let it go, if you do push back, or there might be some conflict, there's also maybe there isn't, like, okay, there's no leader who can keep the peace, and you can't let it go, then there's that too. And then there's nothing wrong with that either. There's sometimes there's just not a right and wrong. You just have to let that go, right? It's just how it is sometimes.
Well, and I really think it's valuable as practitioners to recognize how much we can change ourselves and our own attitude towards it, so let's say that happens, like there's a little bit of bullying, or there's some manipulation, or something's happening, and you recognize that it doesn't really ultimately have that much impact on anything, and it's better to let it go. But that's something that has to change inside. So we work on the feeling we have, we work on our animosity and our self-righteousness and all of that, because like someone says, like in a marriage or partnership, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And how can we let go? Ajahn Ganha says, if you take your stand from the Dhamma and not from the sense of self, then you can live together. But if we take it from the sense of self, because I think that's what I'm hearing you say, it's kind of like step away from this part that is offended, or like you see this is wrong, it shouldn't be this way. Well, there's like almost everything has got a part that shouldn't be that way in the world, but it also is, like you said, it's not always that way. Sometimes it really is important to step up, to criticize, to confront, and evaluating that, like, when is it good to just let it go, and when is it important to really work it out, deal with it, it has a lot to do with the impact. And we have to do what we can to understand the impact on people. Given their conditioning, it can be very different. And when you see that some way that this group operates is actually creating severe limitations on somebody for their peace of mind, for their safety, for their development, then you really do need to, bring it to light and work on it, face it, right? And in the Vinaya, there are these different ways to settle a dispute. It's a list of 7, I think, or something.
Yeah.
The last one is covered over with grass. That's what you're talking about.
Yes, let it go.
You can't come to an agreement. It doesn't really matter that much. Just cover it over with grass. Like it just, okay, whatever. Yeah.
But I feel like if you're skillful, whether or not you have any authority in this situation or not, if this person, if you cover it over with grass, they might resent. Well, maybe you could do something small, like, just talk to them and say, hey, I know how you feel, like just talk to not to like start factions or anything like that, but just be understanding, right?
Yeah.
Try to help them along.
Yeah, because that helps to soothe it. I remember having this kind of conversation once as an anagarika with another anagarika who got blasted for nothing. And it's like, yeah, you want to let them know, like, yeah, that was off. That was out of line. That wasn't your fault. And yeah, the situation, we're not going to be able to do anything about this. But just know, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Hillary and Adrienne.
Hello. Yeah. Just the talk inspired me in a way that I was thinking that I'm not a confrontational person, and criticizing to me appear confrontational. But I was thinking that if I see something that somebody's doing that's against or violating the precepts, I can give my advice, bring it up, that reminder that, in a very gentle way, that this could not be beneficial. And then in terms of praises, some people really need that encouragement. Like, when they're feeling so down, and I can tell them that, well, you're really not bad. You're very good in this, and that. And that is encouragement. Because I'm not the best person to judge that what is right and wrong, but just like following those guidelines, I think I can probably pretty safe walking on the middle way. That is just the inspiration I'm getting out of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adrienne. Venerable Kunga.
Thank you, Ayya Santussikā, for your beautiful teaching. I hadn't heard that sutta before, but I really love the structure of when there's 4 different options, and then, the compare and contrast. I feel like it really fleshes out so much that's helpful. And what I took away from that sutta is that as spiritual practitioners, we have sort of a responsibility to look after other people's welfare. Like, we're not going around judging people or feeling like we have to, give our opinion and control things. But if we see someone doing something, and if we have a good motivation, then we should stop and think about, how can I give them feedback in a way that would be helpful for them? And at the Abbey, we talk a lot about giving feedback. That's what we call it. I think the Vinaya term is like admonishment in the version of the Vinaya that we follow. And we say, oh, that word is a little bit too harsh, So feedback, it seems a bit friendlier, but it's always done like, what is my motivation? Is it to help the other person, or is it to just have them change to the way I like? But that element, like we have to be actively engaged in looking after each other's welfare and not just being like the ascetic who said, okay, just don't say anything. It's like, no, that's not the best way to engage with other people. It's like we have to really stop and think and, how can I be of benefit to them? So I like that aspect.
Yeah, thank you. And another part that the Buddha was so clear about, and when you reading the suttas, you can see him doing it himself, that he always had permission to give feedback. If someone came to him or some problem in the Sangha, in the monastic Sangha was brought to him, he would just blast the person because they're his student. Because being his disciple gives him the permission to tell them exactly what he needs to tell them, what's right to tell them. But with other people, he would just invite them in a way to make them curious enough to say, tell me, and then he could tell them, because they're already part of the conversation. They're open and wanting to know. And, so like when we live together in monastic Sangha, like you're saying, Venerable, it's like there's already a kind of permission, because we are living together according to this code of ethics. And we are living together with the intention of developing ourselves and awakening. And we want to know. And we are encouraged to focus on that and want to know and let go of our armor, our protections, because that will keep us from knowing. That will keep us from understanding. And so it's always really good to evaluate what the situation is that you're in. Do I have the permission? Do I have the invitation? It's really an invitation. Do I have the invitation to offer this feedback? And if we don't, sometimes it's important enough that we have to find a way, and maybe we can ask, are you willing to hear my perspective on this? Because I'm concerned. And what you said is so important. Am I concerned for you, or am I just pushing my own kind of perspective, agenda, my viewpoint, my opinion, and to really, as best we can, like Venerable Kunga says, to really be doing this from a place of generosity, of kindness, of care. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes me think the way Venerable Kunga said it too is nice, because it's like the guy who thinks it's equanimity to not say anything. It's really better to say something from a place of equanimity, praise or blame. If it's coming out of a place of equanimity, not judgment, it's like, oh, this is what's happening kind of thing. Oh, that's not good. Or, oh, that's really good, but there's no self in it. It's just equanimous, like clearly seeing whatever the situation is and speaking out of that. And care is even better. The meta's in there. You can put all the right speech things in when you say it or whatever. But the real equanimity is to see it for what it is and not be judging from a place of ego, but from a place of Dhamma. So it's nice.
And it takes work to get to that point.
Yeah.
Unless, we're fully beyond the sense of self, then that is really valuable work. Mm-hmm. How do I move from this position of feeling offended or feeling self-righteous to a place of seeing it in a more balanced, open, even-minded, my concern for these other beings in this situation, as well as for myself on an equal level or something like that.
Yeah. I watch the news sometimes and there's so much righteous indignation. It's not equanimous. It's like,
you mean in them?
How?
You mean in them out there?
How?
No, I'm kidding. You mean the righteous indignation and the lack of equanimity is in them?
Oh no, me. It's very clearly me. I was just like, how is this happening?
can joke because I know from here too. Joyce?
Yeah, I'm struggling here about whether to bring this up. And it's about the Pope. And I grew up on the northwest side of Chicago in a working class neighborhood filled with immigrants, most of whom are Catholic, big Catholic church there. And well, I'm starting to lose my train of thought because I've been so nervous about whether to share this or not. But I find the media that I have listened to is not very balanced around, the background of this particular man. And not that he hasn't changed and hasn't grown, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just always kind of disturbed when the media doesn't really, dig in and present, the praise and maybe the blame. I don't know if they would actually characterize it that way. But there was some coverage on Democracy Now! I can't remember. I think it was the day after the Pope was named. If people were interested in that, because some of the people who were affected by some of the choices made by the Pope, and he's probably grown beyond that, but just to have a more balanced approach would just be it would touch my heart just to know that both sides are there so people can evaluate for themselves. So do you have any feedback for me about whether I should have shared this? And feel free to just delete it if you would like. You don't
No,
have to
I
delete it.
think what you said is valid and important, and I agree. And I did see some details, and I think, first of all, we all are sometimes blameworthy and sometimes praiseworthy. And like with Pope Francis, also, there were obviously things that people felt were not the way they wanted them to be. And you're always when you have such a high visibility, there's always going to be things like that. And I know I've made decisions in the past that I wouldn't make the same way now. And I know that, I think there are still probably things based on what I've read, and I don't know that much. There are still things with this particular Pope that I wouldn't agree with, that I think will probably come to light as things go on. So I'm not expecting perfection, and I do agree with you that we need to be open and see the whole thing. And there are various reports and articles that are, like looking at this person as a person who's got certain views and opinions and approaches and decisions. And I can appreciate that. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's also not a highly rigid conservative kind of attitude or belief system, I think there, which I'm really grateful about. Something more in line with what Pope Francis was doing, but we'll see.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't think that this Pope committed these, I don't know what you call them, the blame aspect, but I think he was involved with a cover up of it. So that's an issue too. And
yeah, and I don't know what he thinks about it now. I mean, I saw the same kind of thing with Pope Francis. There was a time when he was, he said things that kind of dismissed issues around the sexual scandals. And then I read that he really started to spend time with victims, and he really changed it really changed his understanding and his approach. And so this is what we want to see in ourselves and in one another, that we actually change. And when we see the change, we need to let go of the past, because we have to let go of it in ourselves, which is sometimes hard to do. We can still carry well, I did that stupid thing, or I did that unskillful thing. But if we're changed, we need to let that go. we've got to forgive and let it go, and encourage that change that's been made to be solid and move forward in the right direction. So I think those are some of the things to look at. And the questions you're asking about, like, okay, what part did he play then? And what does he think about it now? And I know that people are trying to understand this person from every possible perspective. They're probably tormenting his brothers by constant trying to get information and all of that, which is good. It's good. It's good. It's good to support, impartial news as much. No news can be impartial entirely, but it's important to support a deeper look at things, because most of the time with these people who are so far from us, whether it's far from us geographically or far from us in terms of accessibility, we can't know anything much about them really, except for what we read and hear. So we definitely want to support the balanced and fearless investigation of whatever it is that we are going to scrutinize.
Well, thank you for using the word balanced, because I think that's where I'm kind of coming from, is that to realize that he has now changed, which would be a wonderful teaching for anybody who is a Catholic and hears his message, to realize that, because we are all, I'm going to say flawed. I mean, it's a judgmental term, but I think it would be a good teaching, and things can come. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future, and maybe some of this will come out and be discussed openly. So I'll just let go of the floor here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. This whole idea of change is so crucial. It's crucial to realize that everything in this world is changing, and our attachment to it is inevitable suffering. And it's also important to realize that the changes we make through our practice and our development are crucial to our awakening. We're all going to change. We are changing. And I don't mean to make it sound like we got to think, oh, enlightenment is way out there and I've got to change so much to get there, because that's not really the way to see it either, we're told by the masters. It's like, what we're told is it's right here. What changes is our perception to really see it for what it is, can be like right now, and to recognize that this changes what's happening here, and that personality that has been conditioned into us is never going to be perfected. Even when we really realize Nibbana, the personality is still operating on a conventional level that is not perfect.
Yeah, he could just be a really great role model for the possibility of change, instead of just saying, thou shalt not do that. Even to be just more open and to say, these are changes that I have accomplished in my life.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my
my
desire.
Thank you. And I appreciate that perspective. It's important. James?
On the subject of praise and criticism, it kind of seems in the UK that there's two forms of small talk. It's either about the weather or it's complaining and criticizing things. I don't know whether this is the case all around the world, but and I certainly have this within me, but I don't see it as a positive quality, because you when you observe, you notice how praising things and pointing out the good in the world, it uplifts the mind and it sets the heart into a wholesome direction. But a mind that's always looking for things to criticize and to pointing out the bad in the world only drags us down. So I feel like, although Buddha recommends the fourth option, that one that praises when deserving and criticizes when appropriate, perhaps that's more for someone who's achieved a sort of higher level of mind than I have. And in the meantime, perhaps I'll be better off praising and just cutting out the criticism. And I really feel like, for me, right speech, sometimes the if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. It might actually be the wise direction. You know what I mean?
Maybe 99% of the time, James, or 90% of the time. And then when it's like, I like the elements that have come out in our conversation around seeing the right time to criticize in the right way that actually is for the benefit of the person and for ourselves and for everyone involved. That's a healthy kind of revelation of, you know, what's good to know and what's good to pay attention to and what's good to change. And so I hear what you mean, and I agree. You know, if the conditions around us and the conditioning we've had tends towards the griping and the blaming mind, then we want to really dial that back and go the other way, pull it into balance, and with those situations that are really in need of correction, pull out that discernment and skill in offering criticism appropriately. That's what I think. Thank you, James. It's so important to look at what is the effect on the mind. What is the effect on the mind when you listen to the news? Where is that taking you? And what are you doing with that? It is so important to be informed to some degree, but to also put it all in a context of Dhamma and look at what is my practice now? How do I apply the Dhamma to this?
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone.